welcome to another episode of Her Hoop Stats Unplugged. As always, you're here with Megan Gauer, and I'm super excited today because we've got a lot to talk about. It was a big Sunday of action. We released our Beck Hammon Mid-Season watch list for the Mid-Major Player of the Year. All of that going on. So to talk about all of that, I have Jacob Mox with me today from our Her Hoop Stats team. Hey, Jacob, how's it going?
Doing well, Megan. How about you?
Doing good. And we've got exciting things to talk about today because the Becky Hammon Mid-Major Player of the Year mid-season watch list dropped this week. Jacob's a big part of putting that out and kind of who gets on that list. So excited to have him on today to talk about the players on that list, the players in the mid-majors that you should be watching. I mean, we've got some big names on this list. Obviously, I think one that jumps right off the page also announced that she's declaring for the WNBA draft this week is Kirsten Bell at Florida Gulf Coast University. I think that's
and she's
go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say she's the reigning winner, so kind of just based on that seems to be the leader in the clubhouse. But at this point, it's like anyone can just go off over these next couple months and really kind of prove themselves, and especially with a lot of these players are going to be in the tournament, and we'll have just additional cracks at some of those high major programs and really kind of elevate their production. So
yeah, for sure. I think especially when you see these players put up these huge numbers against, Power 5 type schools, big time opponents, it's always like really interesting to see how much that can carry over beyond just some of their, easier games that they have in their conferences. But like you said, Bell has been fantastic this year, reigning winner. She's also leading the country in scoring right now. So just, continuing where she left off last year and having a fantastic season. She's been a lot of fun to watch. I think, we got some of those kind of big non-conference games from her earlier in the season too. Florida Gulf Coast is a team that played some big games. I believe they upset LSU earlier in the season. So, and they keep climbing in the rankings. So I think a loss that for LSU will probably look like not a bad loss at all come tournament time, the way Florida Gulf Coast is playing right now.
Yeah, I mean, really, Florida Gulf Coast, their one loss so far this year was Princeton, and that was a barn burner of a game. That's their only loss. LSU only has one loss. So like combined, like you said, it certainly makes Bell look really good, but it's not to take away anything from the season LSU's having. So
for sure. Yeah, I think just two really good teams. Florida Gulf Coast, I believe they're in the top 25 now. I think they've crept back in there. They were in there for a little bit, dropped out, but I think they are back in there now. So
yeah,
getting some national recognition there.
Yeah, always really like to see kind of AP voters, especially give some of those mid-major teams that national recognition. And it's a bummer that like a team like Missouri State, they were hanging around, but they're potentially not going to show up in the rankings for a lot more this year, or even in the receiving votes with Jasmine Franklin out for the rest of the season. So, and then obviously there's BYU in a similar situation with as Florida Gulf Coast, where I believe they have one, maybe two losses throughout the season. I think they're 14-1 or maybe 15-1 at this point. But got to kind of fill the void that maybe Missouri State isn't at their as elite as they have been in the past couple of seasons. So.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a team that's not going to creep their way into the top 25 this year, but still a good team. And I feel like the MVC in general just has been really interesting this year. They're maybe not in the top 25, not necessarily because they're not a near top 25 team, but because people are undervaluing how hard it is to beat some of those Missouri Valley Conference teams too. I think that's part of it as well. It's a conference.
Yeah, and they're not, and kind of a little off topic, but they're not nearly, the conference as a whole is not nearly as, they're not as likely to be able to still get a at-large bid in the event there's like a bid stealer situation. But like that, you never know if Missouri State's going to put it together in Jasmine Franklin's absence, and kind of maybe they do put themselves in a position to potentially be an at-large, but it just gets way more difficult without Franklin and her massive impact on the court. So
yeah, exactly. I think it's going to make it harder for them. I think a team that we probably would have seen as an at-large bid, maybe if she was available, but
yeah,
unfortunate situation for them for it to break that way. I think another player on this list that jumps out at me as a team that's kind of, had some luck and gave them some trouble in a couple of Big Ten opponents this year is Macy Williams from IUPUI. I mean, they held Michigan down to the wire earlier in the season. Michigan was able to win that game, but then upset Iowa also this season. So a team that's definitely been able to hang around with some of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and typically like the Horizon League isn't looked at as one of the elite mid-major conferences, but what IUPUI has been able to do, especially led by Macy Williams, I think this is actually her fifth, maybe even her sixth year. She's at least a super senior. She might be a super duper senior. But what they've been able to do kind of on her back essentially is really impressive. Like you said, starting off the season at Michigan, taking them down to the wire. Williams had 17 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 steals. Like she just fills up the stat sheet in literally every single column. Sometimes it means she's given away some turnovers too, but for the most part, like she's about as close as it gets to like a 5x5 threat currently. Not quite a quadruple double threat or anything like that. But never know if she puts together a crazy game out of nowhere. But yeah, what she's been able to do for IUPUI is huge. And she's one of the players that's made it to at least one of our watch lists each of the 3 years that it's been in its existence. So she's kind of had that staying power as an elite force in the Horizon Valley or in the Horizon League.
For sure. Yeah. It's been fantastic again this year. I've been really impressed with her, especially in those major conference games where, she's been obviously a huge part of the reason that IUPUI has been able to hang around with some of those top teams, and you get a sense that she's very much a player that could be playing at that kind of power conference top team in the nation level. So
yeah,
I think who else jumps out here? I mean, UMass has just been like quietly flying under the radar this season as a really good team. They faltered a little bit the last week or so, but a team that I think prior to this week had only lost 2 games, one of which was to Iowa State and the other to Boston College. So by no means bad losses. And I mean, Sam Breen has obviously been a huge part of that as well, averaging a double-double. Probably a team that we're going to see in the tournament this year that I feel like is going to be one of those kind of mid-major lines that you're circling as like this could be a potential upset game.
Yeah, I mean, Sam Breen, like you said, she's averaging a double-double. And then on top of that, she's averaging a steal and a half a block, and a handful of assists per game. Her kind of like all-around contributions are relatively unmatched, like not even this year, just in recent years. And it doesn't even just stop with her, even in the A10. There's Emmanuel Tahan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, at Rhode Island. She's been dominant this year. And there were even some players that didn't make the list that were very close to the list. One of the kind of big names we were looking at was at Fordham, Anna DeWolf. She had some huge games early in the year, but just like I said, just barely was definitely like deep in the discussion to be on this 15-player watch list. So kind of out of nowhere, the A10 just developed this like massive amount of like star level players that in past years they maybe had like 1 or 2 players on these lists that were in contention. Going back to like, I think the one name I can like remember off the top of my head is in the very first year, Nicole Cardano Hillary, who's now with Indiana, was on the list. And other than that, I can't think of anyone. So they kind of had a gap last year, and now all of a sudden they have 3 excellent players. And like you said, they could, either them or Rhode Island, they could end up being at-large bids. And then you have Fordham kind of in the back, or not in the background, just kind of at the same level, playing very well. They had some games, I believe they pushed like Baylor to their limit early in the year as well. Ended up not pulling out a win, but to go into Waco and do that is really impressive. And then even like a team like Dayton has been knocking off teams like Fordham and has been beating teams like UMass. So we could potentially see multiple bids. And I mean, I haven't looked too closely at it, but possibly they have multiple at-large bids which if you had said that last year would have been really weird. So
Yeah, I think a conference that's just been generally very exciting this year. I mean, we're really not that far from March. I'm like, oh, it's a little early to talk about conference tournaments, but March is coming very quickly. So I think when you're starting to look at, conference tournaments that I'm circling, in addition to obviously, your Power 5 conference tournament, this one is going to be a big one. I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to have an effect on who's going to be in the tournament, but it's also just going to be fun to see who's going to come out of that one, because I think there's going to be a lot of interesting games in that tournament.
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing that, because like the way it shakes out, if a Dayton or a Fordham comes in and steals a bid from and again, I wouldn't even call it stealing, they're all kind of on similar levels. If like UMass or Rhode Island don't win, like we could see a 3-bid A10, which again, can't stress enough like how they've been a solid mid-major conference, but not a 3-bid conference very recently. So, or at least maybe I'm misremembering, but yeah.
Yeah, no, can't at least think of any time that they've been a 3-bid conference. So I think it hasn't been recently, at least. So it should be interesting to see if they end up in that kind of situation. Even definitely, I would say probably a 2-bid conference this year, even if, Rhode Island UMass wins the tournament. I kind of feel like it would be hard to leave those 2 teams out of the at-large selection. Granted, I mean, obviously there's still a fair amount of basketball to be played, so anything could happen, but assuming they kind of finish out their season strong, those are probably 2 at-large programs.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they kind of keep any losses like contained within that pod of those kind of upper echelon of teams. Could be a different story if they drop a couple to some of the like mid to bottom teams in the conference, but I mean, as of the way they've played so far, we wouldn't really expect that. So
exactly. Any other names in particular you wanted to highlight on this list?
Yeah, so I mean, I did touch on Jasmine Franklin. So she is out for the rest of the year with an ACL injury. But really, so she had limited minutes. She's been out since late December. So really, that says a lot about what she was able to accomplish in that short period, that she still did make this list of 15, because we do judge based on production to date, not necessarily production going forward. So for her in that limited amount of time to rack up the production for us to feel she was worthy of making this list is really impressive. And you can see that in the change in play, the change in just like the level of play of Missouri State since her injury. And like I said before, that's not totally wiping them out of the conversation for at large, but it's going to make it a lot tighter for them to be able to pull that off. So definitely want to kind of call attention to her, especially since she won't be able to be playing going forward. This is likely or very likely that she will not make the future list. So I want to give a shout out to her at this point. Deja Fair at Buffalo. She's been on this mid-season watch list all 3 years we've done this, and she did it the first season as a freshman. And to see her just continue to keep that same level of production that she had as a freshman, which was nearly unprecedented for a freshman. And what's huge this year is she's always had the volume, but this year she's added in the efficiency at a level where her freshman and sophomore seasons, it looked like she was kind of pressing a little bit and she was maybe overextending herself trying to score so much. And this year it's seeming to come a little bit more naturally, just in the fact that her points per scoring attempt was pretty average, like under a point per scoring attempt, and it's jumped up to 1.1 so far this season. So I mean, that was one of the only, like truly one of the only knocks against her production past seasons, and to see that jump to a much higher level, especially for someone at that volume, that definitely makes her a much more serious contender for this award than in years past. And she's still got a year left after this, so I guess we'll have to see where that goes, especially with Kirsten Bell declaring for the draft over the past couple of weeks. So
yeah, definitely. I feel like Buffalo is just one of those schools too that always seems to have at least one like really, really solid player, and it's usually a team that ends up winning that conference championship and making it into March Madness. So you get to see them on the national stage, which is always exciting as well.
Yeah, and really the path there is going to be a little bit, and maybe not easier this year. I feel like some of the names in the MAC are still there outside of Buffalo, like Erica Johnson and CC Hooks at Ohio. But I've gotten the sense that their path to the tournament's going to just be a little bit easier this year. One player that I was actually really excited about coming into the season was Lexi Fleming at Bowling Green State. She's not on this list because she's been injured since the preseason with a knee injury. She put together an excellent freshman year last season. I actually haven't heard any updates about any returns played this year, but having her not available for Bowling Green has definitely changed their outlook this season. But yeah, it's been a bit of a weird year for the MAC. They haven't been nearly as prevalent nationally, but Deja Fair is holding up her production.
Definitely a player I'm excited to see. Kind of when we get to March, I'm sure we're going to see her in the NCAA tournament, so that'll be exciting.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a guard that can just put up numbers like that, like you can just get hot at the right time and knock off big teams. So.
Yep, exactly. So always kind of fun players to keep an eye on. And in March, they're a big part of what causes a lot of those first round upsets. So always excited to circle.
Yeah. And then I did just want to call out one other player, which is Jennifer Coleman of Navy. And I believe these stats might be a couple games out of date just based on when we released our list. But as of, I believe this would have been as of about a week ago, she was averaging 23.5 points per game, 10.6 rebounds per game, 4.6 assists, and 3 steals per game, which is like, and I'm not using this lightly, like that is unprecedented. It has not happened in the history of our database, and I'd be very willing to bet that it's never happened. Obviously, our database only goes back to 2009, 2010, but that combination of doing all those things at such an elite level is truly incredible. So in what we're kind of calling the her hoop stats era, so that 2009, 2010 window, nobody else has even averaged 20, 10, 4, and 3, and she's averaging 23.5. So she's got a wiggle room from that even. It's really impressive what she's been able to do this year.
Yeah, it's so impressive to see kind of a player that can contribute to the game on just like every place in the floor. It's always really impressive to see that. And obviously, like you said, her stat line just insane. I can't think of a player that really has that skill set, even that does it at a less of a volume to be able to kind of make all those big plays. So definitely.
Yeah. She's certainly one of the players that has flown under the radar a lot more than someone with those stats you'd think would get like that kind of press. So I think that she'll start getting some more press as the season goes on. Maybe we'll see them in the tournament. I'm off the top of my head, I can't think of who in the Patriot League would be at the top of the standings, but I'd be willing to bet Navy's up there. And she's a senior. I'm not sure if she has plans to return for another year or anything like that, or if she might be looking at the draft. But I mean, with someone who has such a wide skill set, definitely worth WNBA teams taking a look at least. So
yeah, for sure, exactly. Someone that should at least get a look in, training camp or something, you might be able to impact the team.
Yeah, I think that's what I've got. The names, especially the names that we weren't able to touch on, or new names on the list from the preseason when we chatted back in probably early November. But yeah, always love talking about mid-major players. They just don't get the coverage they deserve. And as someone who went to mid-major school, and yeah, definitely enjoy chatting about it. So.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I think we say this a lot on here, but if you're only watching like Power 5 hoops, you're definitely missing out on a lot of great players. So always fun to talk about some of those and kind of give them some spotlights.
Yeah. I mean, if you're only watching 14% of all games, you're going to miss a lot of great players. So.
Exactly. So yeah, excited also for these players to get their national shine come March too. I think it's always an exciting part when some of these players get to make it to the tournament and you really get that national stage attention and put up big numbers against a big team or upset someone in the first or second round. It kind of
Yeah,
gets the national
and
spotlight.
yeah, like even just going back to last year, Alexis Dye and Troy, they didn't pull out the win. And I can't for the life of me remember who they were playing, but
I think wasn't it A&M, because I feel like A&M,
yes,
yeah, they had like those
yep,
two games where the refs will say
yep,
a little bit.
yeah. So she balled out in that game, and they like unfortunately due to some less than ideal reffing and less than ideal review processes, didn't come away with the win. And then stuff happened with them and Iowa State the next round. But yeah, like that she had a great season leading up to that, but that got her so much more on the radar. And then she goes out and she transfers to a Power 5 school, and obviously that just means that she's one less player that we get to claim under the list. But we like to see players kind of going wherever they feel comfortable going, obviously. So
Exactly. Yeah, always exciting to see that in March.
yeah.
All right. Well, outside of the mid-majors, there was also a ton of Power 5 action this week. I think we have to start at the big game on Thursday between Louisville and NC State, battle for the top of the standings in the ACC. This game was a wild game. I mean, Louisville just had total control through the first three quarters. I think I actually talked to a lot of people that turned it off after the third quarter, like, NC State's down 15. This is over. Well, it wasn't over. NC State scored 31 points in the fourth quarter, 31-8. Outscored Louisville in the fourth quarter, came back to win it by nearly double figures by 9 points. Just an absolutely crazy ending to that game.
Yeah, I was kind of selfishly watching other games and just keeping an eye on the score, seeing if I needed to kind of switch the channel over. And then by the time I checked, like you said, it was the end of the third quarter. I'm like, well, I can probably just stick with the games I'm already watching. And then in the midst of watching Caitlin Clark put together her game, I'm getting like all these notes in our watch party Slack channel, like wow, what a run, and I'm like barely like aware of what's going on, and then I check the score again, and all of a sudden they're up like 5 with a couple of minutes to go. So yeah, sadly I missed most of the action, but, yeah.
Yeah, just insane. I mean, Diamond Johnson was a huge part of that. Hit some big threes. I feel like you had to know that NC State was going to start hitting threes at some point. They're a team that's got 4 players that shoot over 40% from 3. They weren't shooting them well all game. At some point, they had to start falling, and they did in the fourth. They went 5 for 6 from 3 in the fourth, which was a huge part of what eventually led them to win the game. But
yeah, and they hit most of their free throws, and Louisville didn't, and that's usually a pretty good sign too. And I mean, just being able to hold on to a lead, can't shoot 58% from free throws, and they didn't even draw that many free throws either. So, and like I said, I didn't watch too much of it, so maybe some of that is maybe there's some ref angle there, but if you're going to get to the line 12 times, you got to make more than 7 of them in a close game. So,
yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, it was interesting to me. Like, I kind of thought that NC State would win this game going into it. I think Louisville is so good defensively, but I just didn't know if they could keep up with NC State scoring, because NC State can score the ball so well. Like I said, they can shoot the 3 ball really well, which I think makes them really hard to keep up with. And Louisville did great at that for 3 quarters. Just obviously failed to do that in the fourth. So I don't know. I did think we learned a little bit about both of these teams from that, but I think it's kind of what I expected to see. You knew that NC State could knock down those shots, and eventually they did. And Louisville did a great job defending them, but just couldn't stop that 3 ball totally, which, I mean, I don't think that's something you can expect from either team. I did think a really bright spot in this game, though, for Louisville is Olivia Cochran, their sophomore center, came out and played a great game. She had 19 points playing against Eliza Kinane. I thought she looked like the better post player on the floor for much of that game. So I think that's a really good sign for Louisville, because I think that's an area that I feel like they've been lacking in a little bit. Cochran hasn't had a fantastic season so far, but to see her kind of come out and put together her best game of the season against Canadian, I think is a really good sign for them.
Yeah, and just looking at the box score, I didn't clock this before, but of her 7 rebounds, 5 of them are on the offensive boards too, and that's huge. And honestly, it makes it a little bit weirder that they blew that lead, where they have all those offensive rebounds and forced 15 turnovers. But I mean, like you said, once NC State starts hitting shots and they're playing at home and the crowd is into it, like you can't really measure the effect of like a hyped up crowd and like how that can just deflate any momentum for the opposing team. So
yeah, and I think this is also just a really, really good NC State offense. Like holding them to 68 is still pretty good from Louisville. Like I don't think that says anything negative about their defense. They just can really shoot the ball, and I think that's what makes them so good as a team, and that they can shoot the ball not just from their starting lineup, but Diamond Johnson still comes off the bench for them, and she can come in and be a big impact. She scored 16 points. So it's basically the catalyst of that entire fourth quarter run off the bench. So having a player like that you can bring in off the bench and really just amp things up like that, I think is just so huge for this team. It's part of what makes them so good. It's why they're kind of part of that top tier of teams. I think a team that you're going to talk about going to the Final Four, being in contention for a championship this year.
absolutely, yeah. I wish I had. I mean, I don't regret watching Caitlin Clark absolutely shred my hometown Gophers, but I do wish I had been able to see more of the game live. So
yeah, for sure. I didn't have it on the agenda for today, but I feel like we have to talk about Caitlin Clark and her back-to-back at 30-point triple doubles. First time ever in college basketball, men's or women's period. Never happened in D1 college basketball before. Basically joins a handful of NBA players as the only players to ever record back-to-back 30-point triple doubles. And obviously NBA players have 8 more minutes of game to do that. So just really, really incredible what she's been able to do over the last few games for Iowa.
yeah, and so like I said, putting those 2 games back to back is like really, really impressive. But one of the things that hasn't been like even hit on, just based on like the pure like breadth of all the amazing stuff that happened in that game, her just stat line alone has like literally never happened in Division I history. And typically it's hard for us to say that because obviously our database only goes back to the 2009 season. But because this was a triple double, we have a record of every triple double ever. We built a dashboard just kind of on the side for fun, based on the data that the NCAA record books have. And like we can definitively say nobody in the, how long have they been since 1982? So nobody in 40 years of women's Division I basketball has like ever done that. And like that alone is insane. And then you tack on, it was following up a different 30-point triple double, which like she's the only person to have 2 back-to-back. I believe she's only the only person to have 2 in their entire career, let alone back-to-back. I might be wrong about that. I should probably check that after, but I wouldn't be shocked if she's at least tied for the career record for 30-point triple doubles. So just really impressive all around what she was able to do in that game. So
yeah, exactly. I think she already broke the Big Ten single season record for triple doubles, and it's only January 23rd, so still got plenty of time to extend that record. And I want to say she's only a few off for like the all-time Big Ten record for number of triple doubles, and she's only a sophomore too. So I'm sure that record is going to be in her name at some point in her career.
Yeah, I can pull that up on the side, but like, so yeah, she has 4 this season. Previous record was 3. If we want to even include teams that are currently in the Big Ten, but were not when the triple double was recorded, I believe, I need to get the name right. There was a Maryland player, and I need to just make sure I'm naming the right Maryland player. Alyssa Thomas. Alyssa Thomas had 4 in 2014 when they were not yet in the Big Ten. So I mean, even if you bring her into the mix, Caitlin Clark is tied among all programs that are currently in the Big Ten. If she picks up her 5th, it'll be Sabrina Ionescu, and Danielle Carlson ahead of her for single season. And she'd be tied with Nicole Powell and Chastity Bars. So really impressive what she's been able to do. And like you said, she's a sophomore. She has 5 already. She's tied for 8 all time, like ever total, which is insane for a sophomore. So, I mean, obviously the rate of the triple double has slowed down very, very quickly compared to where it was at with Sabrina Ionescu. But it's not gone all together between her. Haley Cavender has, I think, had 3 this season. She may have had 1 last year. I'm not totally. No, I don't think she had 1 last year, but I believe she has 3 this year, including 1 just the other day. I mean, and the Big Ten's really racking them up this year. Yeah. I mean, the Big Ten's kind of carved out a niche as post UNESCO as the conference of triple doubles. So
it has. I would make a joke about the defense in the Big Ten and what that might be, but I'll restrain myself.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, the Gopher defense can sort of be blamed for giving up 35 points and all that stuff to Caitlin Clark. And as someone in our watch party Slack mentioned, like, why are they going under screens on like one of the best 3-point shooters in the country? But a triple double is a triple double, regardless of some of those external factors. So
exactly, yeah. I don't want to take anything away from Caitlin Clark on that, so I'll avoid making that joke. But yeah. All right, and then the power conference I really wanted to dive into today is the Big 12, because I mean it has to be the best we've seen the Big 12 be in a long time. But I think it's just been so interesting. And I think the most interesting part is you've got all these ranked teams, but then people are upsetting each other left and right too. So it's just been a very interesting conference to follow the season. Plus, it's really nice that their games are not on Thursday and Sunday every week, so it's easier to watch them. But I feel like the obvious place to start here has to be the fact that today, this was a Sunday game, Kansas State beat Oklahoma. Ayoka Lee scored 61 points, NCAA record for points in a single game. 61 points on 23 of 30 shooting, 15 of 17 from the free-throw line. Also had 12 rebounds and 3 blocks. Just like
for good measure.
Yeah, just for good measure. Just unfathomable. Like 61 points in a game. Oklahoma only scored 65. She nearly outscored a top 15 team by herself.
When she kind of got the standing ovation, a couple, I think it was like 1 play after she hit 61 with the first dead ball. It was 61-61 at that time. So she went to the bench matching a like deservedly ranked 14th Oklahoma Sooner team. It was one of the most absurd scoring performances I've ever seen. They were double teaming, they were triple teaming on the catch, they were double teaming before the catch. They were like playing a zone, like a kind of a junky zone defense where there were kind of just 4 people circling around her at all times. It was, I mean, a lot of credit honestly goes to the team for just getting her the ball. Just like going down the assist line, Sundell had 8 assists, Glenn had 7, Ebert had 6, Mackey had 3, and Dallinger had 2. Like everyone was just firing on all cylinders on like perfect passes into the post. And they had a few turnovers off of those, but not as many as you'd expect for someone being double and triple teamed. So I know this is kind of a cliche that you hear a lot, but like that was a team accomplishment. But at the same time, massive props for anyone to shoot whatever that would be. Like over like what would that be 72-73% of the game. Like that alone is insane. But to shoot the ball 30 times and do that, and then throw in like nearly perfect from free throws, 15 of 17, is just utterly ridiculous. I was checking in on the box score like a minute into the second quarter, And I believe that she was outscoring them like 18-15 or something. Okay, I'm gonna keep an eye on this, see how long she can outscore them for. And then it just like ballooned. It's like, oh, she's like keeping up this pace, if not scoring faster right now. And it became really real at the end of the fourth, or at the end of the third quarter. She had 49 points. I was like looking at Big 12 scoring records because I'm like, oh, well, she's probably not going to get to 60, but we'll keep that possibility open. But let's see if she'll challenge Brittany Griner's 50-point game, which had been the Big 12 scoring title. And she passed it like a couple minutes into the fourth quarter. I'm like, all right, let's see how far this can go. And she got pulled, I think, with 2 or 3 minutes left. She could have hit 70 if they just kept feeding her the ball and didn't bench her. But I think she was gassed, so I can understand taking her out after that. But it was something to watch. It was great.
Yeah, not just, I mean, the 61 points is just insane in itself, but then against a top 15 team, she 1.61 points per scoring attempt. That's also her points per play. She didn't turn it over once. Like, just it's just absolutely insane. Like, I don't know. I don't have any other words for it. It's just insane. I mean, she's been so good all season long too. I know Kansas State isn't ranked currently. They're probably going to move back into, I would guess, the top 25 this week with that win. But a team that's definitely, been on the fringe of the top 25, largely because of her. She's leading the country in win shares at this point. So I think second behind Aaliyah Boston in win shares per 40, leading the country in PER. Like, I think Aaliyah Boston is going to win National Player of the Year, but I don't know how you don't at least think that Ayoka Lee is challenging for that at this point. She is the reason that this Kansas State team is on the radar this year. I don't think they're a team that we would have been talking about ton in the preseason, but what she's been able to do, I think they're tied for first in the Big 12 right now. They could challenge for a Big 12 title. If they win a Big 12 title, I don't know how you don't have at least kind of have to start making an argument for her versus Aaliyah Boston in terms of National Player of the Year.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue is that maybe the perception of the Big 12 hasn't caught up to the reality, and you kind of see that in the polls too, where the reason it's like, oh wow, how are all these unranked teams knocking off these ranked teams in the Big 12? And it's like, well, more of them probably should be ranked. That's why. And so like Kansas State was ranked for a week, and then they lost a game to an unranked team that like they're just on like such a slim margin that like one loss or maybe it was 2 losses just like really quickly knocked them out of the top 25. And so everyone's just kind of like bouncing in and out of the rankings in that like 20 to 25 range outside of like Baylor and Iowa State. And then now Oklahoma's been rising up in the rankings. But yeah, I think the perception of the Big 12 just hasn't quite caught up to where they actually are. And they have at least 2 like strong national title contenders and like 4 or 5 other teams that are still like in the mix to win the conference tournament or win the conference regular season, win the conference tournament. That's certainly going to be definitely the most fun high major conference to watch throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think it's just been so fun so far. I mean, you've got an Iowa State team that's really good, Baylor team that's really good, this Kansas State team, Oklahoma, like we said, that just lost to Kansas State, but you also still have Texas too. And then Kansas, a team that's been flying very much under the radar, but a very good Kansas team. And even West Virginia there, that's sitting at 2-4 in the conference right now, but could be a tournament team. Like this is a really, really deep conference this year. I agree with you. I don't think the rankings have necessarily caught up with that, which is probably why Kansas State isn't ranked right now, but it is, I think, and also probably why Lee hasn't been really in that full National Player of the Year conversation. But what she's doing against these big teams is really impressive.
Yeah, and I think like coming into the season, there were kind of like, it was almost like a hot take to say, is this the year that Iowa State surpasses Baylor? And it's kind of turned into, is this the year where Iowa State or Oklahoma or Kansas State or like any number of other teams surpasses Baylor just all of a sudden? So yeah, I think they're just going to kind of cannibalize each other, and what that's probably going to lead to is lower seeds in the tournament than they probably deserve, or like not lower digits, you know what higher digits, lower seeds.
Mhm.
And then I think we're going to see some upsets, and people are going to go, well, yeah, we probably should have seen that coming. But
Yep.
going to be a lot of like 8, 9, 7 seeds that are going to make some runs out of the Big 12 is my prediction. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And on the note of teams that are in that top conversation, I would have said that, yeah, it was Iowa State's year to upset Baylor, but then Baylor took down Iowa State today, and I'm still trying to figure that one out. I think Baylor struggled as of late, but I mean, they take on Iowa State by over 25 points today, which is definitely not the result I was expecting. And Iowa State was healthy today. I know they played earlier this week and lost without Ashley Jones, which is obviously a huge blow for them, but they had Ashley Jones back today. So they had their kind of full lineup back today, but Baylor was just able to get the win. And I mean, Melissa Smith had a great game, 17 points, but it was really Jordan Lewis, 24 points on 9 of 11 shooting. She went 6 of 7 from the three. Oh, sorry, that's no, yep, no, that is 3-pointer. 6 of 7 from 3. So
I know
that's what
it seems so weird that, yeah, I was gonna say, it seems so weird that like Baylor would be shooting threes. There was a I believe a couple years ago, some player on Baylor hit 13 threes, and it's like just the single player hit 13 threes, and that had been the program record for team threes in a game. So historically speaking, they're not leading into the three very much. So to see someone go, I mean, her and then also Andrews, she shot 4 or 5 from 3.
Mhm.
So maybe they're trying to, or I mean, obviously they're trying to buck that, trying to be a little bit more modern with their game, even though they are built around Melissa Smith. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is not Kim Mulkey's Baylor anymore. Old school is Kim Mulkey would say. But yeah, I mean, a lot of threes today. I mean, not something they've done a huge job of so far this season. They're only about, average in terms of 3-point rate so far this season. And they're shooting about 34% from beyond the arc on the season. So it's a little bit of an atypical, I would say, performance for them to go 57% from deep. So I don't know that we learned a whole lot about like Baylor from that, other than they got hot from 3 today, but still obviously a huge win for them. I think they've been lacking that like statement win on their tournament resume, and they got it today.
Yeah, and I think the other story in the game is Iowa State, like you said, they were healthy, or they had players available. I don't know how healthy they truly were. I believe at least 2 of the players who were out for the previous game were just contacts, not actual positive cases, is what it sounds like. But even then, Ashley Jones in her first game back, and maybe it was just a little bit of being rusty after a week since their last game, and they were maybe having to isolate and not practice. But Ashley Jones went 4 of 14. She was a solid 3 of 8 from 3, but that obviously means that she went 1 of 6 inside the arc, and that's not sustainable for, and I guess she's listed as a guard, but she's practically a forward. Same with Lexi Donarski. She played all 40 minutes and went 1 of 11, including 0 for 5 from 3. Yeah, I mean, just uncharacteristically poor shooting from them inside the arc, especially the last couple of games. They've shot decent from behind the arc. If you remove Donarski's 0 for 5, they were like a respectable 30-ish% from 3. But yeah, maybe the Big 12 has just figured out something about their game and figured out how to disrupt their 2-point shooting. But I think that'll be something to see if they can bounce back from going forward.
Yeah, and I think your point about rust is a good one too. I think it's something we're kind of seeing across the country at this point. We've got a lot of teams that have had players that are out of COVID protocol and, missing time and missing practice, and then they got to reintegrate back in with the team, which even after only missing a week, I think can just take a minute to do. So I think that's probably part of the story with Iowa State here as well. Yep. I certainly don't envy anyone that's like on the selection committee this year and has to try to figure out how they're going to like seed all these teams, accounting for all these absences. It's just become absolutely wild. Like the number of teams that are without this player this game and this player that game, and how do you treat all those wins and losses when obviously like big pieces are missing at times is really interesting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. I even just like how they're going to handle games that can't be made up, and
Right.
just like unbalanced schedules and things like that. Like that alone, it's going to be pretty complicated.
Mhm.
Yeah, like you said, then bringing in having to like even just being aware, like obviously we don't 100% or we don't fully blame like a lot of like the committee or anything for not paying as much attention to the mid majors, but at the same level, like it's equally hard to keep track of everything, even at the high major perspective when it comes to who was playing what game. And then like even beyond knowing that, like you said, then you have to apply like whatever internal adjustments based on that. Yeah, that's gonna be tough. They might have to like roll out like their like kind of standard operating procedure, like set in place rules for how they have to judge those to make sure that they're doing it uniformly. But
Yeah.
because otherwise you could have a situation where like, let's say Kirsten Bell is a close contact and is out for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden Florida Gulf Coast loses a couple games, like that could slip by just by the nature of them being a mid-major. That could pretty easily slip by or slip under the radar for the selection committee. Whereas if Melissa Smith is out for a couple games, they're for sure going to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's going to be very interesting to see how that all works out. I feel like, I mean, everyone always has gripes with what the selection committee comes up with. I feel like it could be a year where people have a lot of gripes with that between the injuries and the COVID and everything else. It's going to be very interesting to see what things look like. Hopefully we're going to get a like first look at that, at least at the top soon. I think usually it's early February that they release kind of that first look at the top 16 seeds. So that's something I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to.
I wonder, you could probably like scan through and figure out like a big ESPN game and just probably, that'd be the best guess for when they'll reveal it. So probably they feel like they would have announced the South Carolina UConn if it was going to be that. So
I was wondering if we would get it this week because of that game, but I'm going to go with a no. They haven't announced it at this point, so maybe it's. I guess it is usually early February, so this week would be a little early. So probably a big game that first or second week of February.
And typically the NCAA, for all their faults, they're usually pretty good about publicizing that stuff pretty early. It's not a WNBA draft lottery situation where they just kind of leave everyone in the dark for until you're not in the dark. So it seems like we would get some sort of week or 2 weeks notice on that. So
yeah, I think there is UConn Tennessee is, I believe, an ESPN game on like February 6th. I wouldn't be surprised to see that be the game that they do it for.
Yeah, that would be because
UConn Tennessee is, a big draw as well. So
yeah, and that's an off week for the NFL, so they won't have to compete against anything there too. Right. So that I would maybe bet money on that being it, but
yeah, which will be fun. It'll be done at halftime, and then depending on the result of that game, probably irrelevant 20 minutes. Always one part about them revealing it in the middle of some big game that definitely impacts where teams will be seated. So, but yeah, looking forward to that. Well, thank you, Jacob, for hopping on this week. Yeah,
I enjoyed it. As I said before, always enjoy talking mid majors and weird and insane stats. So yeah,
61 points is definitely a fun thing to get to talk about on Sunday night.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thanks again for hopping on. Well, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening. As always, make sure to rate, like, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to us. Also, make sure you're subscribed to the stats site, herhoopstats.com, for all your NCAA stats. We've got all types of things in there, rankings for all the teams in Division I, predictions for game results. So definitely go check that out, especially as we're getting into crunch time of the NCAA season. Also, make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter on Substack. It's free and you get all of our best content in your inbox directly. And be sure to follow us on social media at Her Hoop Stats on all channels, and the YouTube channel also under Her Hoop Stats. Thanks again for listening.